I love when it counts us in, right? It's like New Year's Eve almost, right? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then it says go with an exclamation point.
Yeah.
Um, so we're live. This is the second live stream that Chase has ever done. So very exciting. Um, my name, as printed on the bottom, is Tim Kotzman from the Bitcoin Treasuries podcast. I'm here with Chase Palmieri, CEO at Acropolis. Am I saying Palmieri right, or did I butcher that
You
again?
said Palmieri and Acropolis, right? We're doing good.
Oh my. What? How do people pronounce Acropolis?
Oh
It's
no,
not
I'm just
Acropolis.
teasing you. You nailed it.
Oh,
You're
okay,
good.
okay, okay. I'm like, I hope people don't mispronounce Acropolis because I feel like that's one of the intermediate words. We won't say easy
Yeah.
words,
I was
but
happy we landed on a name that isn't reinventing names.
yeah, yeah. What is there any meaning behind Acropolis? Like,
So
obviously,
yeah,
yeah.
Mason, our co-founder, he was in Greece when he came up with the name, and so he was actually at the Greek Acropolis the day that he came up with the name. So Mason, the principal at Early Riders, who kind of is the original founder of Acropolis before I joined. So yeah, they just wanted something that sounded sturdy, long-lasting, timeless, like a corporate Bitcoin treasury.
That's a very cool story, first of all. And I guess let's start with some of the unfortunate news, some of the disappointments, and then we'll get into some of the exciting stuff, um, which is basically that I think Acropolis is like the best kept secret in Bitcoin treasuries, but we'll get to that later. What are some of the conversations that you've been having with corporates as the Bitcoin treasury officer outsourced solution, or however else you'd like to frame up Acropolis?
Yeah, so that's pretty much how we frame it. We're an outsourced Bitcoin treasury team working with some of the companies that you've had on your show, some that other people will recognize. We kind of are behind the scenes helping with custody, day-to-day Bitcoin treasury management, accumulation strategy, investor relations, corporate communications, tax and accounting treatment. So we kind of are doing the dirty work while some of these companies are out there tapping capital markets, and I hope we have time to touch on what you're doing on the marketing front to market out these Bitcoin treasury companies, because I was excited to see you taking a step in there. But it's kind of to what you mentioned, as bold up as we all are about Bitcoin treasuries and corporate adoption, people are seeing the stories for pubcos. They're probably seeing a lot of the private companies being announced across Twitter as well. It seems like what used to be a once a quarter news event is now a daily story about a new company adopting a Bitcoin treasury strategy. But to pour some cold water on that, because we talk to companies every day, I did want to kind of share some of the disappointing conversations that we're still unfortunately having. So we talk to about, on average, 12 to 15 companies a week that are exploring a Bitcoin treasury strategy. And I'd say still about a third of them are having some of these conversations with us. So I'll kind of list them out, and then Tim, you let me know which one is worth us kind of going deeper on. So a pretty obvious one is that a business is failing or stalling out on growth, and somebody on the executive team knows that adding Bitcoin to the treasury would save the business. But even though the company is drowning, it still somehow seems too risky to the rest of the executive team. And so they can't build the consensus, despite the fact that there might actually be, a CEO with personal Bitcoin holdings or a CFO with personal Bitcoin holdings. They still just think it's too much. It's almost more career risk to try to use Bitcoin as the Hail Mary to create that second chapter than to just go down with the ship the way it is. So that's interesting, that it's still perceived that way inside of many C-suites. Um, we do have a lot of folks who are like, yeah, I'm the CFO, I'm in charge of the treasury, I am a Bitcoin maxi. I have I have more than 100% of my position personally in Bitcoin, but there's a 0% chance that we can get Bitcoin on the corporate balance sheet. I've raised it in meetings before. There's zero interest. trust me, if there was even a 1% interest, I would bring you guys in. So that's disappointing, because, you know, we have CFOs and CEOs who are believers and who are desperate to help their companies, but there's something about the consensus building in these companies that is still too much to overcome. Another one we get a lot is, okay, we know that we need to own digital assets. We want to have a diversified portfolio of crypto. We understand that we need to own Bitcoin, and you guys are Bitcoin only at Acropolis, but we think we need to have a diversified portfolio of crypto. And so we have to really have kind of the conversation about what makes Bitcoin different still. A lot of those companies, even if they do understand that Bitcoin's different, for whatever reason, XRP in particular, Ripple, has infiltrated the kind of finance world in a way that I've not seen with other tokens. So we'll have corporate treasurers come to us and they'll say, we know we want to do the responsible thing of only buying Bitcoin for the treasury, but what about XRP as well? And doesn't that, isn't that worth adding? So for whatever reason, XRP comes up in our conversations more than Ether.
Hmm.
I'll list out quickly the last ones because I know I'm ranting now, but another one is we want to accept Bitcoin as payment. And we say, why do you want to do that? Do you know that Bitcoiners don't typically want to let go of their Bitcoin? They'd rather spend in dollars. And like, is this to build a Bitcoin treasury position? Is that why you want to do it? Because it's the cheapest way to build a Bitcoin treasury position is to accept Bitcoin as payment, but you also shouldn't expect that it's going to be a meaningful amount. And they basically say, no, we would flip it right back into fiat currency. We just want the marketing push out of it. So there's a lot of that going on as well.
Marketing
Um,
push. Okay. Marketing push.
yeah. And if I can't borrow against it at lower rates, then why would I hold it on my balance sheet? So we're trying to have the conversation that, borrowing against Bitcoin, this pristine collateral, the rates will come down. They are coming down. You need to have more of a reason to hold it on your balance sheet than just the near-term borrowing of capital. And then maybe last one I'll mention is just some folks want to wash trade to kind of lower their income tax over a period, and Bitcoin still is kind of friendly when it comes to wash trading rules. So they see it as kind of a gimmick to try to offset revenue in other sides of the business, but not actually, a staple in their corporate treasury. So those are just some. I actually have some more, but I don't want to spend too much time on the downers.
I mean, I think that was number 6. Can you get to 10? Because
I'll give you another one is, so we have the ICO craze. What was that? 2017 was that ish? So
17,
we
yeah.
have some companies coming to us and they're like, we had our ICO, we raised X amount of millions, but we now want to start dumping, we want to start selling the ICO token that we hold ourselves to establish a Bitcoin treasury. And so, we have to have a conversation with them, like, because that it feels a little like we're helping facilitate a rug pull in a way, right? So we don't want to help companies that are dumping their ICO tokens on retail to convert it into Bitcoin for their long-term
And to be
storage.
clear, Acropolis has not done that,
We have
correct?
not done that, right?
Okay.
But
Okay.
there are folks who come to us and, because they want, like, what's interesting about the crypto world is they do their scammy stuff, but they want to park their long-term capital in Bitcoin. And
Mhm.
so if a scammy company does something scammy, they still want like a proper corporate Bitcoin treasury team to help them. And so we have to, pick and choose who we're willing to work with as well.
Got it. Um, so you touched on XRP and you said that was even more prevalent than ETH. And I've just seen in news articles, and I'm assuming the news articles are accurate, that there are even like Solana treasury companies. Does Solana come up or anything else, or it's mostly XRP?
No, it's either folks coming and saying, "We want digital assets or a diversified portfolio of crypto," but they couldn't necessarily even name the tokens that they're, subconsciously referring to, or they come in
Okay.
and say, most of our customers are, "Hey, we heard you on the podcast. We know what you're about. We're Bitcoin only. We're Bitcoin maxis. We want Bitcoin on the balance sheet, nothing else." So that's the majority of our conversations. But I'm really only talking about this 1/3 or so folks, and they kind of come in and they're like, okay, yes, Bitcoin, but XRP too, right? And I think it's because XRP has kind of infiltrated the narrative that it's going to be used within bank-to-bank payments or stable
Mhm.
coins, that it's going to be the new rails within the fiat system, and that there might be value appreciating to the token based on that. I don't know. They seem to have done an interesting job marketing to those types of finance folks.
Interesting. Um, and I think the second one that you mentioned about the CFOs saying, I'm 100% in personally and I'm 100% out corporately.
It's amazing.
Um, it's something that I um, distinctly remember from when I interviewed Fong Lee over at Strategy, right? He's like, he said he had a lot of those conversations. So not surprising when you take a step back, but in the moment when you're a Bitcoin maxi and you've got your like saber and you're like Bitcoin for everybody, right? It can be a little disheartening to just kind of, but great to have this kind of inside view into where are we in this moment of time, because if and I'm as guilty as the next person might be as far as right all these headlines and I get excited and I'm retweeting and I'm quote tweeting and I'm getting so excited, but to kind of just balance that with some of these realities is super helpful, so thank you for that.
Yeah, we're obviously in the corporate Bitcoin treasury echo chamber, but people are right to be excited. Like we are seeing a massive ramp up in consultations, discovery calls, the size and quality of companies that are coming to us and knocking on our door as well. So people are right to be bullish, but I would just temper it with like, you can Bitcoin price can probably go faster than Bitcoin education, and Bitcoin education still takes kind of the same amount of
Mm.
hours that it takes. And so we are going to have to wait for corporates to catch up a little bit.
I'm going to quote you on that literally. Bitcoin price can probably run faster than Bitcoin education, and then I'll just put quote Chase or dash, right? You put the that in quotes and then you put dash
Yeah,
Chase,
just
run
make
faster
sure it
than.
doesn't look like it's coming from Chase Bank. Make
Right,
sure.
right, right. Well, yeah. That might not be the worst thing if Chase Bank said that. Um, no, Chase from Acropolis. Um, okay. I think I've had more inquiries in the past week than I've had in the past 9 months from
Whoa.
people asking, um, like, hey, here's an idea, or hey, I I literally met someone in Vegas and they said something to the met many people in Vegas. It was great. So I might be blending one or two different conversations, but just asking people the interesting question of how did you come to Bitcoin? Remember, one person said, I came in through the door of, I thought I wanted to prove it wrong. And so I started looking into it so I could just say, from an educated standpoint, this is why this doesn't make sense. And now I'm here. And when I got off stage, right, people are like, hey, how do I do this strategy? And I'm like, well, I can introduce you to a guy, right? And in case people aren't picking up on it, his name's Chase, and he doesn't work at the bank. He works at Acropolis Treasury.
Yes, sir.
Um, but I was also on calls recently with guys that are, I think most people would consider pretty sizable influencers or public figures in the Bitcoin space. And when I mention Acropolis to them, they're like, oh, that's a really good idea. And so that's where I'm not just trying to be cheeky. I think Acropolis, in many ways, is the best kept secret in Bitcoin treasuries. And that's part of why I, texted you late at night and said, "Hey, I think we should do a live stream." One, because I think live streams are cool. I think it's a different dynamic from something that's pre-recorded, and right when you mess up and have to stop for a second, you get to edit it out and you look like a rock star. You know, kind of. I don't know, more to the authenticity, right? It's a live stream, anything can happen, but don't worry. I have my cursor over the end stream button. So at any time. Um, but I guess, can you share a little bit about your background and um, anything that you want to add about Acropolis kind of up to this point? Um, in addition to what you've already shared, anything that um, is it only Bitcoin treasuries? And I'm going to kind of answer that question because, like, you guys do have other services that you talk to clients about, I believe, from cross-border payments, employee benefits, things of
Yeah,
that nature. Are those
sure.
things like, how is that weighted against the Bitcoin treasury strategy? And maybe if you can expand upon the services. And again, I think I just threw 5 questions at you, so I'll
Sure.
I'll, I'll just throw it over to you.
Yeah, sure. So appreciate you saying that Acropolis is the best kept secret in corporate Bitcoin treasuries, because I would have to agree. And I think that that is just a result of the fact that we're working behind the scenes with a lot of the companies that people have heard about. But, we take our client confidentiality very seriously. So, we're not out there necessarily telling folks who we're working with. But you know, it's definitely the case that Acropolis is swimming in a lot of these circles and providing a lot of value on the day-to-day treasury management with these companies. Because at the end of the day, like, if you take a Saylor, yeah, he's unique in that he stepped off of the CEO spot to be the chairman so that he could focus full time on the Bitcoin treasury. But your typical CEO still needs to get back to running their business. And so
Mhm.
that's where Acropolis can add a lot of the value is, we can collaborate on the strategy with the executive team, but then we can go and make sure that we're executing on that day to day so that the C-suite can get back to operating the business. Um, let's see. As for services, so it's true. Acropolis is Bitcoin only, but we do help facilitate stablecoin onboarding. So if we're working with like a multinational client, we'll work with third-party partners to help do stablecoin for cross-border. We have a trapped cash solution, which is kind of interesting. Don't want to speak too much on those. We're going to be sharing more soon. But the real like 1, 2, 3, 4 punch of what Acropolis does is it starts with custody. So I know you're familiar. I'm sure some of your listeners are, because OnRamp is one of the sponsors of the Bitcoin Treasuries show. But OnRamp is our sister company, and OnRamp is pioneering multi-institution custody. So this is a form of custody that is much more appropriate to corporate Bitcoin holdings, because with the corporation, you don't really want the CFO, your compliance officer, and the CEO holding a key. That's not really a safe, secure quorum. And so what we offer corporations, and insurance and continuity planning is kind of all baked into this, is this 3 different qualified custodians where you have a legally distinct agreement with each of the entities, and 2 of those 3 entities you have to do a video verification with in order to move funds. So this is deep, deep, deep cold storage with no single counterparty risk. So that's the base layer. Everything we do at Acropolis to help grow the Bitcoin position is only as good as our ability to hold it for the long term. So that's the custody. Then what we do is we have best in class corporate treasury investment analyst type folks like Glenn Cameron, who you've had on the show. He's responsible for getting the first UK pension fund to allocate to spot Bitcoin. He's our chief investment officer. He's going to dig through your past 5 years financials, and we're going to come up with an initial allocation and ongoing accumulation plan, again, in collaboration with your team, because you probably know something about your forward-looking projections that aren't in your past 5 years financials, right? So we'll come up with that accumulation plan together. Then the next step is to communicate the Bitcoin treasury strategy with internal and external stakeholders. So internally, that could be investor relations, getting the board approval, communicating with key employees, doing employee Q&A webinars. The goal there is to make sure that when that inevitable period of volatility comes, that it doesn't become a distraction to the operating business. You don't have the CEO having to field questions from employees who are wondering what this means for their Bitcoin per share. So that kind of thing, and that includes external. So whether that's inviting them onto our podcast or sending them your way so that you can kind of feature the work they're doing, everything to do with press releases and communicating to the Bitcoin community that the company has adopted Bitcoin as their hurdle rate, and they're on the Bitcoin standard now. And then after that, it's kind of specialized tax and accounting treatment and some things we do on the accretive finance stuff. So for when it's appropriate, a company can raise debt or equity capital through us and some of our partners, private capital, to further advance their Bitcoin position at today's prices. So that's kind of it. It's custody, financial modeling, corporate communications, tax and accounting treatment, and where appropriate, some accretive finance. But yeah, where else were we supposed to go? I think I answered 2 of the 5.
A little bit about your background.
Oh yeah, so my background is more of kind of a traditional entrepreneur operator out of the Silicon Valley area. Operated multiple businesses, everything from hospitality to I spent most of the last decade running a tech company in the media and advertising space, but have been kind of a closeted Bitcoiner since 2016. Just kind of staying humble and stacking sats and using Bitcoin as the corporate treasury for some of my businesses. So I like to joke that I front run Sailor on the corporate Bitcoin treasury strategy. And like for our family restaurant, for example, that's been doing that since 2018. It's been a very nice return, and the Bitcoin position massively outweighs the value of the operating business now. So been deep into Bitcoin since then, and actually using Bitcoin as my corporate treasury and operating businesses, and reached out to Michael Tanguma of OnRamp, for folks that are familiar with him, maybe 7 months ago, when I was looking to do my next chapter. Basically said, hey, let me know if you see any roles opening up for an operator in Bitcoin. He was looking for a CEO to run Acropolis, which is kind of this build venture out of the Early Riders portfolio, which is a Bitcoin denominated venture fund, going after basically an offshoot of OnRamp, trying to bring multi-institution custody and Bitcoin treasury advisory services to the corporate vertical that OnRamp isn't currently focused on. They're more focused on family offices and high net worth individuals. And so I was brought on in November, and we have been doing a lot of really big things since then.
I don't know that this has anything to do with Bitcoin treasuries or Acropolis treasury, but what's been your experience with LinkedIn from a business perspective, and Bitcoin versus basically X and maybe YouTube? And the reason I ask, for me, every single video I do, I post all the usual channels, but I always also, and maybe I shouldn't say also because maybe LinkedIn isn't that bad, but I'll say I also post it to LinkedIn and Facebook, just so that I can continually see that I get zero engagement. Now, there's a little bit of engagement from LinkedIn, but Facebook, I mean, like literally 99% of the stuff I post on there, there's like no one likes it. I don't think on Facebook you can see if someone's like how many impressions it has, but it just blows my mind. Like Facebook 0, LinkedIn like maybe single digit, low double digit, and then X, right? It's like millions of views, not on every video, but some, right? So what's been your experience, and what does that say about, like, is there any like outreach or inbound to Acropolis from LinkedIn versus X, or anything you can share on in that regard? I just think it's interesting from a marketing perspective, and the whole TradFi and Bitcoin, like
Yeah,
they're trying to come together.
you're absolutely right. So we do marketing on LinkedIn. We have our own podcast, New Foundations, on YouTube, and then we do kind of daily posting and putting out research on X, and obviously on our website. When it comes to LinkedIn, we do treat it a little differently than we would treat X. It's less the bold up post and more speaking to the problem. So like, hey, corporate treasurers, if you're not keeping pace with stated inflation, your money market fund, your T-bills, whatever you're investing your corporate treasury in, if you're not keeping pace with at least stated inflation, but probably more realistically true inflation, which is over and above that, then your treasury is losing purchasing power. And all the hard work that your operating business is doing to create and store value is just draining out the other side because you're not paying attention to the balance sheet. You're paying attention only to the P&L. So, we have some success there. The more success we have on LinkedIn is through direct outreach, through messaging. So whatever it is about a CEO title helps. So like we all do direct messaging through LinkedIn, but for whatever reason, my CEO title gets a better response rate. People just want to deal with the CEO oftentimes. We get a lot of, it's kind of three different things. One is, hey, we already have a Bitcoin treasury strategy. We don't need you. We got it, which is great. Like, okay, cool. Glad that we found the right person through our research to reach out to. The next one will be, hey, no, we've been thinking about this and talking about this more, but it would be great to have a call and hear what you guys are doing to help companies on this front. So that's okay. That's our sweet spot. Great. We're catching a company that knows that they should be taking Bitcoin seriously, but knows enough to know that they probably aren't ready to execute it on their own. That's our sweet spot. And then the third, and I've got some really lively messages lately, is
We want to hear the lively messages. So go ahead.
it's basically like, screw you, I don't associate with scammers, F off, and then they unfriend me before I can even reply, right? Or they unconnect before I can even reply. And so there are still a lot of people who, if you reach out about Bitcoin in a traditional corporate setting, they treat you like you're a scammer who got their phone number somehow and are trying to like make them buy some weird token or something. So even in traditional finance, there are people who are treating Bitcoin and people working in Bitcoin as if you're just a run-of-the-mill scammer.
Wow. I'm not surprised only because of the conflating Bitcoin and
Right,
crypto could literally be anything. I mean, I don't spend time trying to figure out crypto, so we'll just leave it at that.
right.
But what's been, assuming that what you just said has not come as a surprise to you, maybe it has, what have been some of the more surprising things over the last couple of months?
Yeah.
Or any other crazy stories are fine too.
Okay, great. One of the, and it shouldn't be surprising, but we tend to forget. One of the surprising things has been how many companies want to do a Bitcoin treasury strategy, but the fiat system and the dollar debasement has hurt them so much that they don't really have enough of a capital position to make an initial allocation themselves with their existing treasury. They're like on life support, but
Mhm.
and it's kind of what Michael Saylor talks about, like the companies who have the need to know are the ones who find Bitcoin. So we get a
Mhm.
lot of these companies and they have the need to know and they've figured it out and they're like, we know we need Bitcoin. And then we're like, great, we can help you do it. Like, can you send us your financials? Let's get an understanding of your free cash flow so we can start to understand, what a Bitcoin position that doesn't put the operating business in jeopardy looks like. And unfortunately, a lot of these businesses have taken too long to find Bitcoin, and they're
Mhm.
in a position where they really don't have much of anything to put towards the Bitcoin position. And so then what they want to do is they want to finance their Bitcoin position. So they say, hey, we barely have enough free cash flow. Like we basically have no free cash flow. We basically have no savings. We're just head above water, but we want Bitcoin and we think it'd be great if we could raise equity or debt capital to finance our Bitcoin position because we don't have capital to just outright buy it. But the problem is when you are looking for equity or debt, or I should say credit, um, you're really borrowing against the quality of the business. And so if
Mhm.
the business is struggling and needs Bitcoin, that also means you're not going to be able to get the kind of credit or equity capital that you want to finance a Bitcoin position. And so unfortunately, we have a lot of conversations, and it's very disheartening because they know what they need to do. They found Bitcoin, but there's really not a lot we can do to help them because the business is not in a position to actually execute on a Bitcoin treasury strategy because it's just barely treading water. So that's another disheartening thing is this fiat system has burdened companies so much, and you can say the COVID money printing era has burdened companies so much that even the companies who get it are not in a financial place to really execute on it half the time. That's been very disappointing.
Got it. That, yeah. So, moral of the story is like there is a point at which it's too late.
Yeah.
Um, and if someone isn't familiar with or appreciates the aspects of Bitcoin to kind of be far enough along on the journey, then you know
Yeah,
the
that's
timing of it is yeah.
well, that's what surprised me is I assumed when I took this job that Bitcoin is good for every business. But the truth of the matter is some companies are too late. Like some companies are on the verge of death and they're not gonna be able to raise the capital to try to finance a Bitcoin position. And we basically have to tell them, like, I'm so sorry. It definitely doesn't make sense for you to be engaging Acropolis because you don't have enough to really, warrant a position right now. You have to just keep your business going. You need to turn your business around first.
Mhm.
It's and that is a really disheartening part of the job is having to kind of look at companies and almost tell them sorry.
Yeah. So let's shift over to where maybe it's not too late, but
Let's get bullish.
we have to, well, we're not quite bullish yet, but we have
Okay.
to get creative.
Okay.
So, um, if someone has some free cash flow, they have a solid business, but they want to amp it up, or like it's like they're okay, but what other questions do you guys ask, or um, ways that to kind of be creative? Like the one example that comes to my mind is, do you have any real estate holdings?
Exactly.
Are there other? Can you walk us through the real estate aspect and any other ways to kind of just kind of how do you guys put your arms around like what is everything and how can you I don't maybe getting creative isn't the right way to put it, but just making sure that you're kind of touching and or at least having a conversation about everything that's on the table to try to at least evaluate it and be able to say, hey, here's everything that you could do, and here's the conversation.
Yeah, that's right. So that's why we have to do the deep dive on their financials because a lot of times business owners don't realize that they have assets that could be borrowed against, for example, to finance that Bitcoin position. So like let's take an example. Let's say you have a coffee chain. They've got 20 locations, and each location makes kind of just a little bit, above their cost, but enough to maybe DCA $10,000 a month per location. Okay, great. They should be doing that. And we will, make sure that they are weighting that properly with a sufficient cash buffer in case, there's an emergency and they have to close down the stores, but maintain their overhead for a month or a couple months. So we work on what that cash buffer is. But a lot of those business owners have forgotten that if they own the real estate, like let's say they own the real estate in all 20 locations, well, that is a powerful asset that you can borrow at very low rates, much lower than you could borrow against Bitcoin as a collateralized loan at, right? So if you have commercial or, in this case, we're talking commercial real estate, you could mortgage it and come up with financing, take on another 30-year term at 6%, and you could use a significant amount of that capital to buy Bitcoin and just add it to your balance sheet. And as long as you can service debt, it's actually net beneficial to your Bitcoin position to, instead of DCAing with those 20 locations, to use what you would DCA to service the debt on a much bigger position at today's prices, right? Does that make sense? So, so whether it's a coffee chain with real estate or a manufacturing business with other heavy, high grade equipment, for example, you'd be surprised what qualifies as an asset that you could borrow against. I mean, technically, even your cash flow is, you could consider an asset if it's predictable cash flow. You could go raise capital at 5 to 10x your EBITDA. So whatever your asset in the business is, you should be thinking about, is there a way to intelligently leverage this to buy more Bitcoin at today's prices? And then maybe instead of DCAing over the next 10 years, just use that cash flow to pay or service the debt on that instrument. So yeah, a lot of companies have assets that they could borrow against, but they've kind of forgotten that they're on their balance sheet.
And does it depend on a lot of different factors when you say someone could borrow, like if you're viewing cash flow as an asset, maybe borrowing 5 to 10x that cash flow, does it, what all does that depend on? And maybe we don't have time to get into every single
Sure.
factor, but
It has to do with the jurisdiction or geography of the business, has to do with the EBITDA. So we're talking like real, what is the profitability of the business, not top line revenue. Top line revenue, it can matter, it can be a signal, but if you're making $50 million a year, but you're spending 51 million to make your 50 million, you're not a business that private capital is going to want to lend you money, or equity capital is going to want to own a part of your business and give you capital for. So it really comes down to what's that free cash flow. And then you can assign a multiple to that. And then that gives you kind of a range of what you can expect to raise from private capital. And so it's, yeah, the what market are you in? So like, it's really has to do with what is the risk profile of the business. If you're a restaurant, that is riskier than a SaaS tech company with really reliable, unit economics and customers that have been with you for 50 years ongoing. So it really comes down to the risk profile of the business, because the private capital that's lending the business money is not saying, here's capital because you're going to go do a Bitcoin treasury strategy and I want to own a piece of a business doing a Bitcoin treasury strategy. No, if they believed in Bitcoin, they would just go buy Bitcoin with their capital. They wouldn't own your business. So when you're taking on this private capital, you're really taking it from people who are traditionally looking at the quality of the business and providing capital based on that. Whether or not you use a Bitcoin treasury strategy, they may or may not care. It may or may not be any of their business. They're really lending you money or investing in your business alongside you with equity capital based on the fundamentals of your business.
and so to be clear, are we talking about private companies doing this or public companies doing this? Because I think, well, I'll just stop there.
Private.
Private.
Private,
Okay.
because if you're public, you're tapping capital markets, and that's a
Okay.
whole other ball game. Um, but yeah, what we're seeing is a lot of private companies coming to us and basically saying, "Hey, I'm a fan of Sailor and the strategy, but I'm not in the public market, so I can't borrow at 0%. But what can I do? Is there anything I can do? Because I'm getting what I personally have called MSTR FOMO. These companies have MSTR FOMO right now."
Got it. Interesting. Anything that you're seeing on the uh, borrowing side that's changed over the past month, or that looks to be changing as far as rates, like borrowing against Bitcoin, borrowing against just any of the market dynamics that have changed recently, or that you think are kind of moving in a different direction?
Well,
Something to keep your eye on.
I think everything's moving in the right direction, which is lower borrowing rates. And we saw a lot of that news at the conference and beforehand from Strike with Jack Mallers. Um, there are more private liquidity pools emerging who understand, hey, if I lend my dollars to an over collateralized Bitcoin loan, and I can get a higher interest rate, or I can get a higher return than a money market fund, and I know that the loan is over collateralized and could be, I could liquidate and take the Bitcoin if I need to. There are people who are starting to see that as an arbitrage. And so one of the interesting things that we're doing is when we come in and we look at the existing corporate treasury of a business, there's a certain amount that we are looking to park in long-term cold storage Bitcoin, which is AKA the money that we don't want to touch for the next 4 to 5 years, and we know we don't have to touch. That we put into Bitcoin. Then there's the dollar liquidity side, where a company still wants to hold cash reserves, but they could ladder out that liquidity, and instead of putting it in a money market fund or T-bills, they can be the dollar liquidity side of the over collateralized loans and basically capture Bitcoin exposure, if you will, for their dollar side of their corporate treasury. Because if they already believe in Bitcoin, but they just can't put the whole thing, their whole treasury in Bitcoin, and they need to keep dollar liquidity, but they understand that an over collateralized Bitcoin loan is in some ways less risky than lending to a government that's $37 trillion in debt. uh, at the end of the day, they get more Bitcoin. Like worst case scenario, they get the Bitcoin, right? And
Mhm,
they add
mhm,
that to the treasury. So, or they liquidate
mhm.
it back into fiat if they really need that for liquidity. So, what we're looking at is basically how Bitcoin can touch all sides of a modern day corporate treasury once the founding team, the operating team believes in Bitcoin. Uh, then there's the deep cold storage, but even the dollar liquidity side that they want can have exposure to Bitcoin and basically be treated at a better return rate than what's out there today.
That's super interesting. We don't need to talk about specific rates, but it almost, in my mind, is like the private equivalent to like a preferred equity from strategy, right?
Yeah.
Where someone's getting somewhere between whatever 7 and 10%, or whatever the rate is, but and just you know
And
getting 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 what they want, and still, well, depending on the product, either having upside, not having upside, but just like appreciating that it's backed by Bitcoin, but also accomplishing their goals.
Yeah, and I'm looking at those instruments. We're paying attention to those instruments right now. Um, we're more interested in being the dollar liquidity side of the other side of the facility. That there's the Bitcoin collateralized loans, and then there's the people lending the dollars to that. Right now, we're focused on that, but you know, as these basically things like STRK or STRF, I guess I should say, kind of this investment grade fixed income tool backed by MSTR's collateral base. I mean, that starts to get interesting even for corporate treasuries. Now, there is the limit on how much a company can own in securities before they themselves become deemed an investment company. So that would become a limitation there. But it is interesting. I start to wonder, like I've mentioned this on some of my podcasts recently at New Foundations, is how long until these credit instruments, these fixed income securities start to compete with government debt, and companies start to actually hold these instruments over money market funds. I don't think we're that far out. I think I think Bitcoin on the corporate treasury comes first, but there will be companies that are using MicroStrategy's vehicles in this way.
Hmm. Anything left on your unfortunate disappointments list, or are we through that?
Uh, I think we're through that. I mean,
Too
yeah.
too too risky. Can't build consensus, and like there's just career risk. CFO, I'm in personally, but not corporately. Digital assets, right? They want a diversified digital asset portfolio. Accepting as payment, but more as a marketing push. I mean, that is almost, if not the perfect segue. Um, I don't know whether Steak and Shake thought it would be a marketing push or not, and as a very positive thing. Um, I can tell you, talking to the executives in the booth in Vegas, they were like, "Oh, we were not at all prepared for the complete, like, overwhelming response in a very positive way." Um, and that they were still basically getting together their kind of media strategy. They're like, we didn't really know or appreciate that there's 157,000 podcasts, and like which one has 34 listeners and which one has 913 people watching them live right now on a
Wow.
Monday. Like, and of course the guy that from True North I was with, they're like, oh, Tim's a real deal. So that was very funny. I appreciate that. But it's like, and same thing with GameStop. One of their employees was like, we're still trying to like get together how we're gonna like really approach the media. And of course, Ryan Cohen kind of historically has not been out there doing the podcast circuit all the time.
Yeah.
So,
Missed
but if
opportunity, really.
yeah, so I thought that was super interesting, and um, that's to your point earlier, where all of this kind of comes together because whether I can bring a unique perspective or someone can be a guest on the Bitcoin
Yeah.
Treasuries podcast, or however we can all work together, like it's going to take all of us. Everything's good for Bitcoin except for XRP, but everything's good for Bitcoin. So um yeah,
That's no, that's why I'm super excited about what I saw you, starting to put those press releases out about. I think so Bitcoin for corporations is doing that for the public companies, right?
Mhm.
But I definitely think you could fill that space of, the media outreach, the storytelling on behalf of the privates, especially, maybe some publics as well, but the private companies that like a Steak and Shake decide to embrace Bitcoin as payment. I think that that worked because they, if correct me if I'm wrong, but they also said that they will not be selling any of the Bitcoin that they receive as payment, right? And so I'm pretty sure that that was part of that announcement, which is what has Bitcoiners excited. If all you're doing is, you're using the new Square interface that converts Bitcoin immediately back into dollars, but you can say you're collecting Bitcoin as payment, it's not really exciting to Bitcoiners. Bitcoiners want to know that you're with them for the ride, that you see the bright orange light, and that's when they really go to bat for you. And so, yeah, if you're a business and you're going to just accept Bitcoin as payment to convert it immediately back into fiat, and you think that you're going to somehow trick Bitcoiners into coming and spending their Bitcoin, or capturing a greater segment of the audience out of that, you're wrong. And it's probably gonna it's actually probably gonna have a backlash. Like you're gonna look silly. You can't pull the wool over a Bitcoiner's eyes. If you're gonna do Bitcoin, you have to, as a company, you have to at least say that you're holding it in your corporate treasury. Like to me, that's step one. Accepting Bitcoin as payment, step two. One thing that we didn't quite mention is employee rewards. So that would be like an interesting step three, which is one of the other things we're doing at Acropolis is, if instead of giving stock options to your employees, if you're a private company, those stock options aren't liquid, and it actually costs money for your employees to exercise those stock options, and their entire livelihood is dependent on that one business's future liquidity event. Instead of doing that, you can buy Bitcoin, not dilute the ownership anymore, and vest Bitcoin to your employees. And that is a really interesting way to basically replace what we think of today as RSUs, restricted stock units, in private companies. You just buy Bitcoin, the pool of that Bitcoin goes up in value, and you vest it on a vesting schedule like you would stock, and everybody wins. The ownership doesn't dilute for the employees. The employees are happy because they're receiving liquid value. That's just another thing that we're doing at Acropolis. You can kind of think of that as Acropolis Labs. We don't do a lot of that, but it is something that exists today if a company wants to go down that road.
Yeah, I mean, you would think that the employees that would get these RSUs, these you know, restricted stock units, right? That if they were a Bitcoin maxi or just appreciated Bitcoin, they'd be excited. If they didn't know anything about Bitcoin, you're kind of prompting them to learn about Bitcoin. Like, is this good or bad? Like, why,
Sell it.
right?
Yeah, if you don't like Bitcoin, you can sell it, but you can't sell your restricted stock units. So we call these RBUs, restricted Bitcoin units. So
Got it.
vesting Bitcoin to your employees, and if they want to keep the Bitcoin, great. If they don't, they can at least liquidate it into dollars or whatever they want for their local currency. But with these stock options in private companies, you never even get to vest them if the company doesn't IPO or have go through an acquisition or something like that.
Yeah. Um, in the comments in the chat, Ben Workman said Bitcoin only,
Yes, sir.
and
Hey, Ben.
someone else said $110,000 Bitcoin. So we're above $110,100 Bitcoin right now.
Wow.
So maybe a live stream is all it took. I don't know.
Yeah, I
Financial
think
advice.
we got there right before the live stream, but
Yeah,
maybe
we're
Bitcoin's early. It smells it out. I think it
yeah
knew that the live stream was coming.
yeah we're continuing the good vibes. We're
Yes.
continuing the good vibes. I was actually asking Ben the other night how you apply for a position at Vibes Capital Management, and
Yes.
he
Let
said
me
he
know.
said he said you don't, you just declare that you have a position there, and
Okay.
then that's it. So I'm trying to figure out what I want my title to be at Vibes Capital Management.
Yeah, I
It's a
think they
very,
they'll
very
have
fun
to
account.
confirm it, right? You'll say, "Hey, I'm this," and then Vibe Capital Management will
Okay,
be like, "Yes, he's part of the team."
okay,
And
okay.
good luck with that. I've been thinking about if I need to have a official job title there as well.
Yeah. I mean, that's a very fun account. So lots of
Is that Adam Livingston's or is that not related to him?
I really can't pinpoint who's behind it, but I I have a feeling that a lot of them enjoy sunbathing and eating steak. But
Yes.
that's about all I can figure out so far.
Okay.
And a lot of prominent Bitcoiners are accepting positions or declaring positions there. So that's pretty fun.
Have you been watching Adam's stuff lately? My God, that guy is a fireball.
I I am I have I got to meet him in Vegas, and he's actually coming on the Bitcoin Treasuries podcast later this week.
He's coming
Um,
on ours next week. Cool.
and I think he said he's only ever done one interview before, so
Yeah.
I'm pretty excited. He's no, it's just awesome, like awesome information.
Yeah.
um, so is it fair to say you're working with more private companies than public companies?
Yeah.
Is that like a fair statement?
Yeah,
And
definitely.
okay,
Definitely mostly private. A big part of that is just that private companies can move faster. Like a lot of what we spent the first part of the pod talking about was consensus building. Well, consensus building within a publicly listed company is even more tricky. There's even more, you know, I's to dot and T's to cross. But with a private company, a lot of times you have one individual or two partners. And if they're both Bitcoiners, they can get a Bitcoin treasury strategy up in a couple days. So we can move really fast. We can have like 1/2 hour call, explain the services, pricing, etc. And if they've already decided that Acropolis is kind of the best shop in the space, then we can move really quickly. And so that's why we try to focus our energy there. But we have had some inbound public companies that want to work with us as well. And it's a longer dating cycle, a little bit longer sales cycle, but we're doing well on that front as well.
got it. Um, it seems like a no-brainer, not financial advice, that as these Bitcoin treasury companies, the public companies kind of pop up in different jurisdictions globally, that could be a very much right Metaplanet as the example, like a strategy in the U.S., Metaplanet in Japan. It could be a huge competitive advantage to be the first or one of the first in a new in a new jurisdiction. Have you had any conversations with prospects or clients around that, either in the
Yeah.
private or the public space, about um, like if they're the first one in a certain market, whether it's geographical or like they're in or a certain industry or anything on that front, or am I
You're
yelling up the wrong tree?
No, you're spot on. So the publics that we are working with and the more that we're talking to the most now are outside the US for exactly your reason. Because, you know, for better or worse, Sailor has kind of run away with the network effects in the US market. And there's a lot of upside to being the strategy copycat in other jurisdictions, especially if that jurisdiction, if the retail market there is limited in their ways of getting Bitcoin exposure, right? That's why MetaPlanet is so interesting, right? Is not only because of the low cost of borrowing capital in Japan, but the limited ways that those folks have been able to gain Bitcoin exposure. So it becomes a really unique vehicle. Like China, I think we're going to see some really powerful Bitcoin treasury companies out of China because the CCP will allow retail investors to invest in Chinese entities and let them gain their Bitcoin exposure that way, as opposed to maybe a way where they hold cold storage Bitcoin and could leave with their wealth. Right. So that's the whole point of capital controls. So in jurisdictions where there are some form of capital controls, I think Bitcoin treasury companies in public markets will do very well. And we are definitely talking to folks in those kinds of jurisdictions.
What else is important to cover? I mean, we could
I,
probably go on for a while.
yeah, we
I
could.
know I'm supposed to be in charge of the questions, but I just wanted
No, no.
just want to do a little check-in with you.
Should Acropolis talk about its referral program? Do you want that to be something we
Sure,
share? Okay.
sure, absolutely.
For folks that are working with other companies, know companies that they think they could orange pill, they think they could move in this direction. If you introduce them to Acropolis, we will pass back 8% of the lifetime revenue of that client to you. So you go get your local grocery chain to take Bitcoin seriously. You don't even have to do that much legwork. If you just make the email introduction and you say, hey, Acropolis, my friend so-and-so owns a 10 grocery shops here in the Minnesota area. I thought that they should talk to you about potentially doing a Bitcoin treasury strategy. If we end up working with them as a client, we will pass back 8% of the lifetime revenue of that client to you. So we're seeing a lot of people who want to work in Bitcoin, but there's
Hmm.
not that many companies in Bitcoin, right? So you kind of have to get creative and do like what you're doing, Tim. Uh, there are a lot of ways to work in Bitcoin and help the Bitcoin network, and participate in the upside without working for a Bitcoin company. And Acropolis is kind of allowing folks to build their own book of business simply by going out, talking to businesses, and making the introduction to Acropolis. We handle the service of that client, and you basically make passive income off of having helped that company get put on a Bitcoin standard. So it's kind of a win-win-win.
That's awesome. I mean, it just reminds me of, my background in energy. Like at a certain point, whether you were driving a truck or you were on a rig, like there were multiple places, but for, you know, the most obvious example is if you wanted to get a job and there was no job in your hometown, like hitchhike your way to West Texas and there will be a job there for you, right? During the boom times. And you see this throughout different industries, different cycles, different periods of time. Right now, like it's global, right? Like Bitcoin is like everywhere. So you can just literally just go door to door to business owners and be like, "Hey, have you ever heard of a Bitcoin treasury strategy?" And
Right.
and literally, if you can just connect them with Chase, not the bank, Chase at Acropolis, there you go. That's your opportunity. So that I appreciate you mentioning that because a lot of people reach out to me and say, "Hey, I want to be more involved in Bitcoin." And, the Bitcoin treasury, like whether it's putting capital together or like, trying to piece together different projects, this is a very actionable
Yeah.
way to just have a conversation right? It doesn't even have to be like just knocking down a pizza store's door and like trying to sell them on Bitcoin treasury strategy. But all of these, we're all in conversations every single day with people that you might think, oh, well, that's just my uncle. Well, your uncle owns 100 restaurants, so
Yeah.
there's an opportunity.
Yeah, it's this is for anybody that wants to break into Bitcoin slowly or all at once. Here's your little Bitcoin side hustle. Like, it's as simple as introducing a company to Acropolis. And you can do that from your normal day job, or you can build up a big enough book of business that it becomes your full-time thing and you become like a one-man consultancy. You can hire more people, go after certain geographies, go after certain industries where you have a network. We're seeing a lot of interest from commodity type businesses. So, go knock on those doors. But yeah, we are trying at Acropolis to not only align our incentives in the same way that Bitcoin aligns incentives with everyone, but really decentralizing our sales force in a way by letting just anybody off the street basically be a sales rep for why businesses should be using Acropolis for a Bitcoin treasury.
And just so we don't wait until the very end to state the obvious, where can people find you and Acropolis online? And I'll just say it and then you can say it again: www.acropolistreasury.com. But I'm sure there's a lot of other places as well.
Yeah, that's the best spot if you want to find out about all of our research and playbooks and everything that we do at Acropolis. Specifically, if you want to reach out to me, you can find me at chase@acropolistreasury.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on X/Twitter at Chase Palmieri, all attached and lowercase. I'm very open to talking to anybody that either wants to bring businesses our way or think about doing a Bitcoin treasury strategy for themselves. There is no business that's too small, but like I said earlier in the call, the business does have to have some level of free cash flow for the business, Bitcoin treasury strategy to make sense. But we're happy to talk to whoever, so please reach out.
And can you give us a little overview of, I know you mentioned Glenn and Mason. Are there any other team members that you wanted to mention? Because I think we're probably going to drag them onto one of these live streams over the next couple of weeks or months or so.
Yeah, I told the team today about this idea, and it was fun. I really like the idea of you kind of highlighting everybody on the team one at a time, like the get to know your Bitcoin treasury team idea. I think, there's Mason Carter, who was formerly on the corporate treasury team at eBay before starting Acropolis. After having tried and failed so many times to get eBay to adopt a Bitcoin treasury, he went off on his own to start Acropolis. So he'll probably be your next guest. And then after that, there's Glenn Cameron, our chief investment officer. He's the one who really works hand in hand with our clients as their kind of outsourced Bitcoin strategy officer, if you will. He does all of the kind of financial modeling, accumulation planning, everything that takes kind of the financial wizardry that his 30 plus years of investment analyst background lends itself towards. And then probably the other person on the team that we'll have on just as kind of call it episode 4 would be Sebastian Danegard. So he's our head of growth, and he's a terrific Bitcoiner in his own right. Takes a lot of the early discovery calls, does a lot of the outreach, and when you want to understand feedback and outreach and which channels Bitcoiners are actually on, which channels are open for Bitcoin business, he's the guy to talk to.
Awesome. And not to steal Sebastian's thunder, but could you outline for us, like if you, in addition to what David in the chat called the decentralized sales, that's a really cool model. Love it. Thank you for that comment. What are the best channels? Like if you are passionate about Bitcoin and you just want to engage with the community and like have your right, the only thing more precious than Bitcoin is time. Like how would you approach kind of entering the conversation, not necessarily so much resources, because I think there's a lot of great resources out there now, but like, would you spend all your time on Twitter X? Would you spend all your time on YouTube videos? Like, how would you kind of approach it from a builder standpoint?
We've had a ton of success with YouTube. Now, granted, we're lucky. We have access to a lot of fantastic Bitcoiners, such as yourself, Ben Workman, who was in the chat, came on. We've had on Dylan. We've had on Dylan Leclerc, Eric Semler. We've had on, um, uh, Parker Lewis was last week.
Like everybody?
Yeah, like if you have access to really fantastic, well-known Bitcoiners, then a YouTube show, a channel is going to be great because you're going to be able to kind of leverage their audience. They're going to discover you because they're just clicking on anything they see Dylan Leclerc's face pop up on, for example. So that's a great way to kind of start to build a little bit of audience. X is great. We've seen like Peter Dwan, who I know you've probably seen him all over X, and I think probably met up with him at Strategy World and the Bitcoin conference because he's swimming in all those MSTR True North circles too. He's doing some incredible things with X Spaces, X Live. So I did one with him a few months ago. He's doing great work on Twitter. I mean, what you see Adam Livingston come out of nowhere and get himself a microphone and just
Rip it.
wow. Yeah, like wow. He has come out of, he was all over X, long form posts, incredible stuff. But now all of a sudden, like overnight, quite the show, quite the engaging, entertaining Bitcoin treasury content coming out of him. So yeah, I would say X and YouTube are really where Bitcoiners live when it comes to content and engagement. And that's anytime you can leverage other Bitcoiners in your network, that's probably wise.
Any thoughts on the legal side as far as if someone's like, well, I have a business. Well, let me rephrase this. Someone's doing something as a side hustle. It's going really well. Would you encourage them to maybe, and this is not financial or legal advice, like to kind of like what does it take to do the Bitcoin treasury strategy with Acropolis? Does it need to be like a legal entity? Like, hey, you have this, whether it's like free cash flow as an individual is just maybe different from free cash flow in any sort of entity like an LLC. Any thoughts or
Yeah.
around that?
Yeah. So at Acropolis, we work specifically with enterprises, so business entities. If you wanted to if you wanted to work with us as an individual, so amazingly, we haven't had that. So what we would do is we would send them directly to OnRamp, right? And we would just refer them over to OnRamp. They would set up their individual account with OnRamp. But if they wanted to engage us to help them from a cash flow standpoint to increase their Bitcoin position, yeah, there's nothing that would stop us from being able to provide that service to them as an individual, but they would be custodying the Bitcoin on behalf of an individual. And so their custody would be with OnRamp, and we'd probably just be charging a direct retainer fee for our services. But again, if your Bitcoin position starts to get big enough, you might want to start thinking about a business entity so that you can take advantage of, tax efficiencies in certain structures. And so we could have that conversation with an individual as well. But honestly, usually if you're making that kind of money to be DCAing sufficiently into Bitcoin, you're either working a really high paying salary, which if that's the case, then great. But typically you're making that kind of money from a business already. Like when the high net worth individuals that work with OnRamp and they park their personal funds at OnRamp, they're an easy target for us to say, hey, you're making all this money from your business. It's passing through your business entity to your personal balance sheet, but you're making this money on your business. You know that a Bitcoin makes sense on your personal balance sheet. Have you ever thought about doing it for your business? That becomes an easy conversation. But yeah, the same strategies apply for an individual versus a business entity. It would just have to work through, the custody KYB versus KYC.
Got it. Maybe this is a different version or flavor of a similar question. Like, I no longer own rental properties, but at one point I did, and the attorney I worked with said, "Hey, put each one of these in a separate LLC," which we could talk about that a different time, whether that's advisable or not, or necessary. But have you had anyone come to you and say, "Hey, um, I have one, two, three, seven rental properties. They're a business, they're in an entity. I want to take some of that cash flow and do the Bitcoin treasury strategy?" Or is that like not the right thing? Like, it has to be more of an operating business where you have like not just like rent checks coming in. Like, is there a cutoff?
No, if there's a business entity there, whether it's the subsidiaries or a parent company, yeah, we would absolutely work with them. And it's one of the interesting places to provide value is, they ask a lot of companies come to us and they have a parent company with a bunch of subsidiaries, and they want to understand, should I be buying Bitcoin for the balance sheet of just the parent company, or just the subsidiaries, or both? And so there are really some interesting tax conversations to have, because if the Bitcoin on your balance sheet is technically at risk if there were to be a lawsuit, and that entity couldn't come up with damages, the Bitcoin could be could come into play there. And so there are reasons to have it in the parent company, and there are reasons to have it in the subsidiary. And sometimes you can have it in the parent company, and then the parent company can lend the Bitcoin or lend dollars to the subsidiaries. So there's a lot of different things that can make sense from a tax standpoint. And that's one of the first conversations we have with companies we onboard, is like, what is the plan? What is the growth plan? And does it make sense for the Bitcoin to be on the subsidiaries or the parent company's balance sheet? But if you're making money as an individual or a business entity, like, come talk to us. We'll help you make the most of this unique moment in time where you can be converting that, devaluing capital into the most scarce asset the world has ever seen.
Awesome. 1,177 people just listening to whatever we're saying right now. It's pretty
Wow.
wild.
Weird,
Um,
weird people.
yeah, we appreciate it, right?
We do, we do.
And
Thank you.
I think that's kind of the interesting thing about live streams is if you put something on X, you can see the impressions, and maybe those impressions are 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, a million. If you put something on YouTube and you're just getting started, someone like myself might get a couple hundred views, might get a couple thousand views. YouTube ain't easy, right? Like, these are real professionals out here, like Adam Livingston, like just bringing the heat
Yeah.
and doing a great job. So yeah, we're trying to kind of, well, we're live streaming maybe somewhere else, but at least on X and YouTube. So we appreciate everybody listening. Yeah, I'll just throw it over to you for any closing thoughts, and maybe we'll remind people how they can reach you, and we'll wrap it up. And really appreciate your time.
No, thank you, Tim. I really appreciate you having me on, and being, so willing to send companies our way and highlight the individuals at Acropolis who are all becoming kind of Bitcoin famous in their own right. It's really interesting. Like, Mason was getting recognized at the conference, and he got some free tickets to Kill Tony's show. So you'll have to ask him about that. That's
That's
a kind of
great.
a funny story. But no, thank you to everybody that tuned in. That's amazing. 1,000 of you tuning in. As for closing thoughts, just we are still early. Like, clearly, we're all right. We are all correct in our thesis that Bitcoin is the future of money. It is the future of digital capital and collateral, and the new financial rails are being built here. But they're being built. We We really aren't there yet. And there are so many companies that if they find Bitcoin a year from now, it's a year too late. If they find Bitcoin 6 months from now, it might be too late. So I really urge you, if you have, just like you had individuals in your life that you spent the time, despite their hesitancy to try to orange pill, if you have business owners or businesses in your life that you want to make sure are going to be on your street corner still, doing whatever they do 2 years from now, whatever businesses you admire, you respect, you love, you cherish, you want to be on sound capital and make sure that they don't go out of business. Because if you thought that the COVID money print was scary for business owners, and it was, I navigated businesses during that time. You know, we had Larry Lepard on the pod a few months ago. The big print is around the corner, and for the companies that don't get out ahead of this, they could be out of business, and we could be looking at everything as just Walmart and Amazon 10 years from now. So if you want small businesses to survive, if you want entrepreneurship to survive, I really urge you to take the same passion you had to orange pilling your parents and your brothers and your sisters and your brothers-in-laws and sisters-in-law and your friends. Apply some of that to the business owners that you want to make sure are around a decade from now, because they need Bitcoin, just as much as anyone else. And the bigger their balance sheet, the more they need it, because at the end of the day, Bitcoin is a monetary network. It's not about how many individuals plug into it. At the end of the day, it's about how much capital plugs into it. So go protect that capital, and you'll be protecting the employees of that business. You'll be protecting your neighborhoods to make sure that they stay vibrant and that there's small businesses on your street and in your downtowns. So please go orange pill a business owner, not just your friends and family.
Let's orange pill the world.
Yes, sir.
Chase Palmieri, CEO at Acropolis, acropolistreasury.com. Of course, feel free to reach out to either one of us. Always happy to chat. And thanks again for the time. I'm going to hit that button in the upper right that says end stream. I think everything
All
went
right.
reasonably well, right?
Yeah.
Nothing catastrophic happened. So no, thanks again. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Tim. Take care.
You too.